We are just about done, John chapter 11. So we're going into the condemnation of Jesus Christ, the plot against him to try and murder him. So last week I was talking about this a little bit, where this is kind of the thematic end to this chapter, where at the very beginning we have somebody who is about to die, Lazarus, and a messenger going up to Jesus that he could be saved. And in this section here, we have messengers going off from Jesus' resurrection of Lazarus so that Jesus may be condemned. So nice little foil there, thematic foil, which John likes to work inside of his written works. So without further ado, let's start getting into it. Since we were covering kind of the Jewish messengers that were them and them witnessing the resurrection of Lazarus, coming to faith because of Jesus' work, and then going up to the Pharisees. We're going to primarily be focused on discussion of the Pharisees along with the chief priests. We don't really get too much of a differentiation between them here, but priests and Pharisees. So can somebody please read John chapter 11, verses 45 to 53, please?
Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit him and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing? They asked. Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away our place and our nation. Then one of them named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm not sure which side Caiaphas was on. In verse 48, it's got to sort of implying that they had to stop Jesus.
No.
But Caiaphas, when he said, I don't know if he's agreeing or disagreeing.
Ah, okay. So, this will make sense if we start talking about what on earth they're talking.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into Caiaphas's statement. So, I think very broadly, so to get into your question a little bit, what is the subject of their concern? Now, is this a religious question that they're actually thinking about?
Most Romans and the power they have currently.
Yes, it's political. So this is all going in more into the political. So the chief priests and the Pharisees, even though they're supposed to be looking after the religious aspect of the people or the theological health of the nation, they're actually the governing Jewish political body. So they're not just religious, they're political. They have to be. Because who's technically in charge right now?
The Romans.
Yeah. You have Pontius Pilate, who is the governor at this time, or if I'm remembering this correctly, his exact title would be more of a consul. So he is the representative of the Roman nation there, and he's the one who is technically governing the people. So if you have the Roman government in charge, then, and they're basically only concerned with Roman affairs, well then who would you actually get who's not necessarily a very politically involved from the Jews to represent them. I'm sorry, that's a confusing question.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say you conquer a nation. Congratulations. The people don't necessarily like you because you conquered their nation. Okay, who would you want to work with in that nation you just conquered in order to govern those people?
The accepted leaders.
Okay, but if you're going to the accepted leaders, these leaders are the political leaders which you just conquered. Are they going to be terribly happy to work with you? No. However, the people aren't just governed by politics, they're going to be governed by religion. And at this time, this is well before the time of the separation of church and state. That actually comes about in the Enlightenment period in Western cultures. It does not come around much earlier than that. And that's more because the political leaders don't want as much religious influence on their decision making because they're following the Enlightenment, and then they're just kind of anti-religious in general. But it's also because the church wants to govern its own affairs, and that's tends to be what's going on when we have separation of church and state. But before this time, they're kind of intertwined. I guess if you followed French history a little bit, or if you read The Three Musketeers, you might remember Cardinal Richelieu in those stories. So Cardinal Richelieu, a cardinal is basically the rank underneath the Pope. He was actually trying to be the de facto ruler of France in opposition to the king. So that's what The Three Musketeers was all about, trying to place more authority under the king than Cardinal Richelieu. Because back then you still have a lot of religious leaders and a great amount of political clout. This is also the setting of the Three Musketeers is also before the Enlightenment. Fun facts. So rather than getting some of the political leaders who are going to be against you and who fought against you, you would be working with the religious figures, and the religious figures are more the ones who are trying to argue for morality and proper conduct. And when you get to the Jewish religion and then also the Christian religion, you could say, we're trying to promote, well, you should submit to those who are in authority. You look to them. So it would make sense for the Romans to go, hey, we have this ruling religious body, and they're very invested in politics. Why don't we just use them to hammer some of this stuff out? So they don't have to do too much else, and the people can have representation within the government system, so the Romans could still be in charge.
So their fear was that if enough people believed Jesus, then the Romans wouldn't consider the Sanhedrin to be a body that was worth catering to, or?
No. Okay, so this is getting more into their statement in 48, where they're saying, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Now, for those of you viewing the screen, it says our temple. Yes,
Yes, it
the
does.
NIV version on the screen is very much making some sort of assumption on here. I'm not agreeing with it. The actual word is our place in the Greek, specifically topos.
But Jesus wasn't saying, he wasn't rebelling against the Romans.
No, he wasn't.
Yeah, he wasn't, but that's not necessarily what the followers would think. Because if we go back, way back, and we'll show the people on the screen this, to John chapter 6. So this is an event that's going on in Galilee. so the feeding of the 5,000 going on in Galilee, and 5,000 men, and however many women and children who happen to be there, but 5,000 men. And I'll just get in here with verse 12. So when they had all had enough to eat, Jesus said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered and filled 12 baskets, and the pieces of 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. So great feast. Definitely a miracle has happened. So logically, verse 14, after the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. So even if Jesus is resistant to this, a lot of the people who would be following around wouldn't be. So when the Pharisees, going back to chapter 11, when they hear that Jesus performed more miracles, and even a far greater miracle than feeding of 5,000, he raised somebody from the dead, what would the people do now?
Want to make him a king.
So, yeah. So it's not as though Jesus is the one promoting this, but you just have people in general going after it. And within living memory would still be a major rebellion. So let's see, did I make any notes of? I just made very generic note. Okay, so King Herod, about when did he die?
Jesus was 7 or 8 or
Oh, no, younger than that.
Which Herod?
Herod the Great. Or Herod the First, if you will.
death of Herod made it safe for Jesus'
Yeah.
family to come back.
Yeah. So Jesus was still pretty young around that time. That would have been around 4 BC. If we're assuming that the historian Josephus is actually accurate in his accounting, there are some people who think that he isn't. In which case it would be closer to around 2 or 1 BC. But that's kind of getting into the weeds. Anyway, so this is a little bit over around 30 years ago from the point of view of the raising of Lazarus. But once Herod died, you have a rebellion against the Romans, because Herod was the Romans' right-hand man in the region. And Herod also had the ability to rule that territory basically because of the Romans. So Herod himself was not Jewish. He was an Idumean, or if you will, Jordanian. So he was from the tribe of Edom, so Esau. He was not an Israelite, but he was ruling the Israelite people, partially thanks to the Romans, who were like, "Oh, hey, this guy can keep all these Jewish people in check. We like him, and he gives us tribute. So yeah, keep going, keep going." But once Herod died, and you didn't have this very strong ruler in there, there was an insurrection that was led. And of course, this is somebody who is trying to say, "Oh yeah, well, I'm the new Messiah, or at least a political Messiah," and he's trying to put himself in charge. And this basically led to the Roman representative in the next province over in Syria coming in and basically crucifying 2,000 people because, hey, we have this rebellion here, I need to put it down. So this is going to be in living memory of the people here. Now, Caiaphas, he might have been fairly young when that was going on, but his father-in-law, Annas, who was high priest around that time, he knew about that, and he could teach his son-in-law, Caiaphas, hey, this is what happens. And it's not as though this is unwarranted thought, because the next really major one happened, if I remember, when was the Bar Kokhba revolt? That was around 130 thereabouts. You have somebody else claiming to be the Messiah, and well, he led a national revolt, and yeah, you had to kill off his entire army, and then yeah, it was not easy. Even before that, it was so where people weren't laying claim to be the Messiah, but rebelling against the Roman people. This was the Jewish War, which 65, yeah, 65 to 71. I covered this in my History of the Christian Church Bible study, so you can always watch the review of that. But essentially, the Jews revolted against the Romans for bringing pagan sacrifices into their temple. And that led to a massive rebellion, and the Romans basically had to destroy all of Jerusalem. That's why we don't have a temple today. Yeah. So it's not like there isn't any precedent for the Sanhedrin to make this call, and they're justified in this because every time that there was rebellion afterwards, the Romans had to come and basically destroy everything, or kill so many people. So yeah, the place and the nation, or if you will, temple and the nation, was basically put down in the Jewish war, which happened 30-some years after Jesus ascended dead. But I take issue with the kind of gloss there where it says our temple and our nation, because it's more our place in our nation, because the Sanhedrin was worried about their specific rulership, which happens to be located more in the temple, but their religious ruling of the people. So they're playing politics, they're not following religion.
My Bible says place and nation.
Should be.
Yeah. Nation too.
I would also accept our place and our people, because the word there is ethnos. So it can refer to a nation, it can refer to a specific ethnic group, or if you have it in the plural, which comes up quite often in the New Testament, that word in the plural means Gentiles. So different ethnic groups.
So when I read this, I read it more as a very self-serving statement, like our place of power over the people that we have power over, not so much concern about the nation being destroyed, but that they would lose power over
Absolutely.
it.
That's basically what John is trying to portray here. They don't really care that much about proper conduct, even from the moral aspect of actually protecting the people, and from the theological aspect, actually preaching what they should preach. It's them in power. So it's all politics. This is going to be one of the major themes that's going on when Jesus actually confronts not only the Jewish leaders, but the Roman leaders in his trials later on in chapters 18 to 19. Yeah, so politics is going to be John's major theme, whereas you now get into two strings where there's the worldly politics, which the people are playing, and Jesus doesn't want to play that game. He's the king of heaven. So his kingdom is not of this world. So why would he care about the politics here when he has a greater kingdom to look after? But the people here are just concerned about what's right in front of their faces. So they don't get this John's point. Yeah. So but the verb there for they asked, so what are we accomplishing, or what are we doing more literally? So what are we doing? This man is doing signs, what are we doing? And they keep asking that again and again and again, because that verb is actually in the imperfect tense. So they're repeating this question, they're going, oh no, what are we going to do? 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 So then one of them named Caiaphas. I just want to get the actual force of what he's trying to say here. So that's 49. Yeah, so he's saying, you don't know anything, you dimwits. Well, not dimwits, but that's my own flourishing. But he's using a double negation, so he's like, you have absolutely no idea what's going on. Basically, just wants them to shut up. So keep circling around and around and around, and he wants them to shut up. So you do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perishes. So there is a couple different ways that this can be taken. One of the ways could be that he's actually trying to cite something earlier, or earlier in scripture, but would actually be a rabbinical principle later on. We don't have any evidence of this being in the thoughts of the rabbis at the time of Jesus, but we do have it later in later records. That there was an interpretation of 2 Samuel chapter 20, where there was a siege, and then somebody gave an ultimatum to the besieged: if you send out your leader, we'll kill him, but we'll let the rest of you go. So they sent him out, and then he died, of course, but the rest of the people lived. So rabbinical tradition, well after the time of the New Testament, cites this as a precedent that it is okay to sacrifice a smaller group of people or one person in order that a greater number of people might survive. Or as Spock would say, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
I take it from this that Caiaphas didn't really know that Jesus was dying to save people from their sins. That God put the words in his mouth, but he didn't necessarily understand what he was saying.
I'll get to that, but yeah, that's my opinion too, is that he's not doing this because he's trying to actually save the nation through Jesus. That's more what John is seeing happening, the guy who's writing this down. But Caiaphas, he's kind of more on the side of the Sanhedrin, going, we have to maintain the political power of the nation.
Why does he say better for you rather than better for us?
Really thought of that.
The translation. Verse 50 starts with you do not.
What verse then? In verse 50, you do not realize that it is better for you that one man die.
Well, yeah, I'm not entirely sure why he would do that, to be quite honest. It may be that he's trying to be consistent in his use of subject. So it says, you know nothing at all, you do not realize the better for you. So he might just be maintaining consistency in number and subject, or number and person, or subject. But yeah,
Is it better for you in the sense of continuing in power, or is it better for you as a nation that one person die?
okay, yeah. So he is actually being consistent in number and person there, because he is referring to the Sanhedrin. Put that better for you, the Sanhedrin, that one man die for the people, than that the whole nation perish. Now Caiaphas isn't necessarily saying that, like if he was including himself in that, so better for us, then I would be saying, I would be more inclined to say that this is completely self-serving, and he's just saying the same thing that everybody else is saying. But Caiaphas might actually be one who is thinking more about the people and the entire nation, because he's actually saying for the people. He's using la'u, okay, because he's not when he's saying the people, he is referring to our people, the Jewish people, rather than our place. So the Sanhedrin was concerned about our place, our nation, but Caiaphas is concerned about the people of the nation, a little bit more so. So Caiaphas might actually be more moral than the other guys, but he's still advocating to, hey, let's lynch this guy. So you can't really push that too far.
So at this point, he was already thinking about crucifying Jesus.
Well, he's not crucifying, it would be stoning.
Yeah.
But no, but yeah, he's saying you do not realize it's better for you that one man die. So he's saying,
To kill him.
yeah, we're going to kill this guy rather than for a possible insurrection, based on the assumption that he's a Messiah. Yeah.
So where did the devil fit into all of this? Is the devil trying to convince the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin? What do you think the devil thought that if they managed to do this, he would get rid of Christ?
Don't know. I try not to put my mind into the thoughts of the devil. That way lies a whole bunch of issues. So apart from an explicit word of scripture about what the devil is doing, I can't say.
I sometimes wonder what he was thinking at that time.
Anyway. So yeah, Caiaphas is basically trying to propose a way out, and it could actually be a rabbinical principle at this time. We don't know. It does come up as a later rabbinical principle, but he's actually basically saying, yeah, we can kill this guy and then the rest of the nation will live. So we actually have something literally outside of tradition, outside of what would be accepted as tradition. So this is a baraita, a rabbinic baraita, and I'm like, I have no idea what this is. So I'm completely relying on Weinrich here for the explanation of this. So a baraita is something that is outside. Literally, it means outside. So it's outside tradition and it's never included in the Mishnah. So for the Jewish holy writings, you have the Tanakh, and the Tanakh is the Old Testament, along with the apocryphal documents, which we don't have currently in our Bibles. But for them, they have that, they have the Tanakh. And then the rabbinical commentary on the Tanakh is the Mishnah. Then the rabbinical commentary on the Mishnah is the Talmud. So the Mishnah does not include this, so it's never included as what the Jews would consider as holy tradition. But it does exist that apparently there was something that went out for 40 days, and that there was a messenger calling for 40 days before the actual execution of Jesus. So 40 is just kind of a round number. We don't know if it's exactly 40 days. A herald was proclaiming that Jesus is going to be stoned for sorcery and proclamation of apostasy. So how true this is, we don't know, because it wasn't included in their tradition. So they're not even saying that it's credible enough to be included in their holy works. So this might be an accurate portrayal of what went on, it might not be. But we do have a suggestion that the month before chapter 12 in John, you start getting somebody calling out in Jerusalem, the Jerusalem area, that if anybody sees Jesus, you're supposed to report this at once so that he can be executed and stoned for his sorcery and proclamation of apostasy. What does that mean? Well, he's performing sorcery, he's doing miracles, which is what they're admitting here. Here is this man performing many signs, verse 47. So they're admitting that if this were true, if this Baraita was true, they're admitting that Jesus actually did perform miracles and that this was witnessed. And they're also admitting that he was claiming, hey, you should follow me. So apostasy in the sense that you're falling away from God as one to the Trinity. Yeah. So this might be true, this might not be true that there was that going out, but even in some extra biblical traditions, the unbelieving Jews are still admitting that Jesus actually did perform miraculous works. They're just going to conclude that that's sorcery, not God, but he did it. So the priests and Pharisees here very concerned about all this stuff, and they're going, and they might just be using the excuse, this is sorcery, to try and kill Jesus, even if this is the work of God, because they're more concerned about politics than religion. Yeah. Now for the chief priests and Pharisees themselves. Well, more concerned with the Pharisees. There was actually a debate whether or not they would actually consider him to be a prophet. This actually comes up, and I'll bring this up for the people on the screen, but this actually comes up end of John chapter 7. So as of the time that they're discussing things with Caiaphas in chapter 11, chapter 7 was occurring about 4 or 5 months before, thereabouts. And this was the Feast of Tabernacles. So you're supposed to go to the temple, you're supposed to go into all these different offerings. And when people hear Jesus basically proclaiming stuff at the temple, the Pharisees sent guards after him. And when the guards came back, they don't have him. And the Pharisees, why didn't you bring him in? The guards go like, well, he's a really good speaker. What? We were kind of confused. And the Pharisees go like, oh, you fell to this guy too. Okay. Well, have any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed in him? Rulers kind of referring more to the Sanhedrin, the chief priests and whatnot. So, like, no, only the ignorant mob, the people in general, they believe this guy, but we, the educated class, we don't believe in him. So they don't know the truth about the Old Testament scriptures, only we can properly interpret them. So on him. Then Nicodemus kind of goes, but according to the law, which you guys are saying that you know better than the people, according to our law, we can't condemn this guy without first hearing what he's doing. Like we can't condemn him without bringing him in for questioning. And then they go like, but why would we pay attention to that? Like, are you like, he's from Galilee, he's definitely not a prophet, therefore we can condemn him. So they just kind of skirt around the law. So the Pharisees just kind of condemn Jesus out of hand here, not necessarily because they actually did any investigation, because if they did any investigation, they realized, yes, he's from Galilee, but he was born in Bethlehem. Or they might actually consider that, hey, there actually was a prophet named Jonah who was from the Galilee region. So even their own president does with that. But essentially, they just want to condemn Jesus because he's popular with the people, and that he's with how they understand their own place and their own interpretations of the Old Testament. So same thing in chapter 1. They just want to condemn him out of hand, and they're they're not following Jewish law to condemn him. Otherwise Jesus would actually be present to defend himself. But they're sentencing him basically without Jesus' knowledge or consent. So this isn't Jewish law. This is more Roman law, where it is actually possible. I'm going to have to. The legal system. Oh yeah, here we go. I thought I wrote this thing. Oh, there we go. Roman law has a form of proscription where they can prescribe this is what's going to happen. So when they actually get the person to come before them, then that's the actual enactment of what they had already decided in private. But yeah, this isn't according to the law of the Old Testament. This is Roman law. So they're not doing it right. It's fine. And any questions before I move on to it? Okay, so they're also not doing it right. And this is something that I believe that John is hinting at quite strongly in his gospel, because Caiaphas is technically not the true high priest. Yeah, or there's at least some debate for that. So in verse 49, so John says, then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. What do you think that year actually refers to?
My note said that he was a high priest for 18 years.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
My notes,
sort of around that time, 17, 18 years.
my notes say the Romans deposed his father-in-law.
And 5 other guys after, well, no, not 5. 3 other guys. So Caiaphas is actually quite possibly illegitimate as a high priest because you have to be in the line of Aaron. Caiaphas is the son-in-law, not the biological son of Annas. So there's some issues that way. Now Caiaphas could actually be also from the family line of Aaron, but it should actually be coming through one line, which should be following Annas's line. But Annas's biological sons were already deposed, because you had Annas being deposed, and then you had his 3 sons being. Annas was deposed in 15 AD, and then you had three more being deposed within the next few years until year 18 AD, where Caiaphas is appointed by the Roman government, not by the Jews, by the Roman government. And even kind of saying that year, who was high priest that year, somewhat implies this might be a up for yearly review. Should you still be a high priest at the end of the year? And if yes, maybe you can continue. So Caiaphas was high priest from 18 AD to 35 AD, if I remember.
36.
37 AD.
Oh, I've got 36.
According to Weiner, 37. So 18 to 37 AD. Give or take.
Is there a lot of guesswork done?
A little bit. Depends how detailed the records are and which calendar system they're using, because the Julian calendar system, which we're using, which also goes back to year 1. There is no year 0. Doesn't make sense. Goes to year 1. This wasn't invented for several hundred years after this time. So we're actually using multiple different calendar systems, so each nation has its own calendar system, and sometimes you just have to go, okay, well, this guy was born such and such amount of time before this guy, and blah, 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 blah. So if they only give you the year, they don't necessarily give you the month and the day. You also have some guesswork in there. Yeah. This is also why First and Second Kings is so confusing, because it's all, and the king of Judah was proclaimed king in the something something year of the king of Israel, who was proclaimed it in the something something year of this other king of Judah, who was proclaimed it. Then you have to follow it all the way back. It's hard. Okay. Yeah, so Caiaphas, this might have been up for a yearly review, could have been by appointment, a yearly appointment, we don't know. John could have also just used the particular word for that year, so this is a very rare word where he's just saying that year, or Naiatus, which is very much different from the regular year that we have. Word for year that we have. So when John uses this term, it's always in reference to Caiaphas. And elsewhere outside of John, it's typically used to denote a yearly event. So that's why it could be something more yearly, or it could be something more auspicious. So it was high priest this auspicious year, the year that Christ died, he just so happened to be priest. But I'm more inclined to say that John is somewhat hinting at, well, Caiaphas wasn't the most legitimate high priest. I'm saying that because I'll write this on the board.
I would think call it high priest and instead of just priest.
Oh, I have to talk about that too. Oh, okay.
High priest was supposed to be for life, right?
Pretty much. So the high priest, how to describe this? Okay.
Like an archbishop.
Oh, way better, way more than that. He was, I guess you could say, more the Pope. But that would kind of be doing it injustice, because the papacy is fraught with its own little things and issues. So the high priest, he was head over the entire nation from a religious perspective. And you can also see this in terms of the sacrifices that they needed to offer for their own forgiveness in the book of Leviticus. So if you have, I think it's a sin offering or a guilt offering, they're different. I'm trying to remember now. I think it's the sin offering. Yes, sin offering. So a sin offering is the regular offering that you give just for your sin. A guilt offering is for any particular sin that you do. And if you do some sort of fault, you have to do that. But sin offering in general is, yes, for the occasional sins that you do, but also for just sin in general. Depending on where you were in society, that's how big of an offering you have to give. So if you were an extreme pauper, then you only had to give a couple doves, because those were, you could even just catch those. You could just make a trap and catch those. You wouldn't need to raise them. But if you were somebody of means, you would have to give, say, a lamb. But if you were head over a household, it had to be a male lamb, not a female lamb. And the further up you go, higher up in quality of animals. So the high priest, when he had to offer something for himself, his offering, a male bull, was on par with the entire nation. So if the entire nation sinned against God, they had to give a male bull. We also see this more at the Day of Atonement, where the high priest is going before the most sacred place, so the presence of God at the Ark of the Covenant. Only the high priest could go up there. But he's actually representing the entire nation, so you have a whole bunch of symbology around that, which is referencing him as representative of all Israel reduced to him. So the high priest is the head over the entire religious fellowship of Israel. Without a high priest who is actively engaged in doing the sacrifices on the Day of Atonement, the nation cannot be forgiven. So everybody would be lost in their sins without the high priest. So the high priest is technically the most important person of all in all of Israel. Kings kind of come up later. They're more of an afterthought when people complain too much. The high priest was the person who was important.
The Jews no longer do sacrifices. Do they still have the priesthood? Do they still have a high priest?
Not to any significant degree that I know of, but I'm not very familiar with Jewish theology, so they might still be tracing some of the lines so that they can say who should be high priest. But this is all dependent upon the temple. Because they don't have a temple, they can't offer any sacrifices because you're only supposed to offer sacrifices at the temple. So even if they did have a high priest, it's somewhat moot because he can't do what he's supposed to be doing.
I never did kind of understand sacrificing the fat of calf or lamb, or like they burn it. Do they burn it completely, or is there meat that's used after, or is just
Depends on the sacrifice. There's 5 main sacrifices. One of them doesn't even involve animals. That's the grain offering. But with the other 4 sacrifices, it depends which one we're talking about. But in all of them, what is not burned would be the unclean parts of the animal. So the digestive tract and everything therein. That's not burned. That's not burned at the altar. That's taken outside of the camp and burned. So the entire animal must be burned. The blood is used to purify what's used in the sacrifices. And the unclean parts of the animal is burned outside of the camp in a very particular devoted area. So it's, yeah, you're burning it in kind of a trash heap, but it's a sacred trash heap from all the sacrificial animals. With the animals themselves, depending on what sacrifice it is, if it's the whole burnt offering, you're burning everything else. If it's the sin offering or guilt offering, some of the meat is going to the priest as payment. The fatty parts are that which must be burned. So anything encased in fat. So some of the main organs, so definitely the liver, the kidneys, and then fatty parts of the animal. That's burned. But the majority of the meat is going to the priest and his family. But if we're going with the Thanksgiving offering, or peace offering, or however you want to call it, Eucharistic offering, because that's more of a direct connection to what we were doing today. With that one, it's kind of a free will offering where you're just giving it to the Lord because he has blessed you. And because you're offering this to the Lord, well, it's given as a wave offering, so the meat is waved before the Lord, and then it's given to both the priest and then also to the person who gave it, and then the person who gave it can also take some of that meat and bring it home to his family, if you will. So with that, so there's a few different ones, but the Eucharistic offering is the one that we can identify most closely with because we have our own Eucharist, where we have our own sacrifice right there in front of us, and we consume the bread and the wine, the flesh and blood of our Lord. And then that can actually be brought into our own household of faith, rather than confined to one place, the temple. I guess bottom line, watch my devotional series on Leviticus, where I go through this in depth. I've done a lot of. Anyways, high priest, very special role within the nation of Israel. If you did not have a high priest, the nation is lost in its sin and cannot be saved. This is why our great high priest, Jesus Christ, is so important, because he does an even greater work than the high priest. But you need a high priest.
I don't understand how the Jewish people today reconcile that.
Cognitive dissonance or bare necessity. So, for us as Christians, we go, well, see, everything in the old temple system is destroyed because we have something greater. So God allowed all this to be destroyed so that we could have this something greater in Jesus Christ. So now we aren't looking towards an earthly temple. We're looking specifically towards the heavenly temple. We're looking to a great high priest, Jesus Christ. We're not looking to an earthly high priest. And we're also not sacrificing things anymore, because Jesus' sacrifice was once for all. So our sacrificial system as Christians is absolutely complete in Jesus Christ. Theirs still needs to continue forever, but they just don't have it. So if they reject Christ, they either have to make up a completely new system, which is basically what the Mishnah and the Talmud is devising, because we don't have the system anymore. And then you also have different variations of Jews, and I can't pretend to know all of them or what they all individually believe. But they have to go into their own systems or actually convert to Christianity. And since most of them don't want to convert to Christianity, they just go off and create their own systems. So you can go into some weird mysticism like Kabbalah, which was invented in the Middle Ages, and it's, just really weird mysticism, where you have to be in the spirit to see all these things in the tree of life and the different words and worlds that are blah, 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 blah. It does not make any sense to me. It just, Anyways, or you can go with kind of the more straightforward traditional Judaism, which is not exactly traditional in the sense that it's actually specifically derived from Pharisees. Because once the temple is destroyed, chief priests, they don't have anywhere to sacrifice, they don't make any sense anymore. Sadducees, they fade out because they don't have any claim to any of the spiritual aspects of things, so they lose power pretty much immediately. Essenes, they're one of the other main groups. They're already in their own hidey holes because they're sectarians and they go off into the desert. So the only ones with any real political clout are the Pharisees, who have already established synagogues throughout the Roman Empire, so they can actually continue. So basically, that you move from a temple system to a synagogal system. So that instead of sacrifice, you're going into teaching, and that's the shift.
They still follow the 10 Commandments, don't they?
Yeah. They would also align, well, to my knowledge anyways, Jews would align with a lot of our understanding of the 10 Commandments. Of course, they don't have Christ to understand what's going on, but they still say, murder isn't just murder, is killing everybody, even in your own heart, hating them. Because when Jesus is saying that, it's not as though he's saying anything new to the people. He's just saying this is the logical conclusion of these things. So you even have some rabbis around the time of Jesus saying similar stuff. This is also where you get some of the Jewish guys going like, see, Jesus wasn't original or creative. He was just trying to be a rabbi like the other rabbis, and he's not a good one because he keeps preaching about himself being Messiah. Anyways.
So they're basically into a works righteousness, kind of follow the laws.
Well, they were always kind of in that because, Pharisees. However, when you get splits in Jewish theology later on, you have groups that are almost not religious at all. So they're still suffering from all the issues that Christians would be suffering from. So you have also like extremely very liberal sects of Judaism. So you have like female Jewish rabbis, and you go, But no. It's even less of an option for you guys. What are you doing? But you have that. You also have them getting into the LGBTQ stuff and stuff, but it's not as prevalent because they're a smaller group than Christians, and they're not as they haven't played as big of a role in politics and or worldwide movements as Christianity has, since we kind of attached ourselves to the world empires which were shaping a lot of this stuff. So we get the blame for, say, colonialism, because that was the head of our governments was Christians. But Jews kind of skirt around that, but they're still suffering from all the same theological problems that Christianity has to deal with. Anyways, what are the problems that they have theologically at the time of Jesus? Okay, so we have Caiaphas. Well, let's have high priest. So the high priest has to have certain traits. And then we have Caiaphas. Oh wait, I should put him closer to the middle. I should put him closer. Oh no, further to the side. Further to the side. There. I have to think through how to write this. Okay. So high priest. So tribe of Levi. Caiaphas, we don't have word, but probably from the tribe of Levi. So this probably isn't an issue. We can say this because if he married into Annas' family, and he's actually still considered a priest, or at least somebody who could act as a priest, he's definitely from the tribe of Levi. So no issue there.
So priests always married in those years, did they?
Hmm?
The priests married in those years, they had wives, or they could have wives.
They're supposed to have wives. Everybody's supposed to be married. In Jewish culture, if you were single, that was unheard of. Like, you could be widowed. That was something that happened all the time. But you were supposed to be married. Because if you were widowed, as a man, so if you were widowed, not that big of an issue. Like, you still want to have a male heir, so you try to get another wife, of course, if you don't have an heir, but not that big of an issue. For women, excuse me, for women, it'd be more of an issue, because if your husband died and you don't own property at this point in time within this culture, how do you survive? Well, you have to rely on your son, and if you don't have a son, then you rely on your husband's brothers, and if you don't have any of those guys, then you have to find a new husband, or if you can't find one of those, then you're kind of out of luck. And that was more or less the situation in the book of Ruth for Naomi. Was Naomi, her husband died, her sons died, and then she was left with her husband's widows, which now had no relation to her. So when she went back to Israel and her family property was also sold off, she had nothing. So she was completely dependent on Ruth to glean the fields for her so that she could actually eat. So this is why it's important to be married. You need to have property. This is also why so much of the Old Testament is focused on the promised land. You need to have land, otherwise how can you eat? This is also why we as Christians look so much forward to paradise. We need to have this promised land of paradise, otherwise when we die, when we are in this state of deprivation, how can we survive? We need to have the promises that God gives. I haven't gotten to that yet in Leviticus, but it's coming. It's coming with those devotions. Okay, and to be the high priest, so a priest could come actually from pretty much any family in Levi, tribe of Levi. But the high priest can only come from the family of Aaron. So Caiaphas, son-in-law to family of Aaron. Now, he could actually be a descendant of Aaron himself, because as tribes intermingle, or families intermingle within a tribe, it's possible that this could occur. But he is not of the best descent, because this should be reckoned through Annas, his father-in-law. Because Annas would be the one who is actually a descendant of Aaron, and then if Annas were to die, then his sons would inherit his place, not exactly his son-in-law. Now, of course, we're also getting into Jewish law, and I'm not entirely sure how it worked quite at this time. So Caiaphas could be reckoned somewhat as an actual son, because he's marrying into the family of the high priest. But this is enough to give you a bit of doubt if it's legitimate.
So the high priest, it would be eldest son of the eldest son of the eldest son for the most part.
Or whoever has the rights of the firstborn.
And that Aaron is Moses' brother?
Yeah,
So
he was the first high priest.
is he younger than Moses?
Yeah, I think it was like by 10 years or so, maybe more. But he was the younger brother. Because Aaron came in after the whole "let's exterminate all the children of the Hebrews" thing in Egypt.
So there was no high priest then before Aaron?
No. God instituted this with the Old Testament law at Mount Sinai. So he's saying this is how things are going to operate, and he chose Aaron specifically to be the head of all the priests as the high priest. And so when Aaron was ordained, this is the first time you had the high priest in the nation. Now, Aaron had 4 sons, and this is why I'm getting to the rights of the firstborn. So Aaron had 4 sons. So in his inaugural service, so Aaron had just been ordained as high priest, and then he now, as the ordained high priest, was going to offer the first sacrifices to God. He did that. They were accepted. Everybody in the nation was happy. And then 2 of his sons, Nadab and Abihu, they then decided, oh, we're going to offer sacrifices ourselves. So it's either they offer sacrifices out of turn, or they offer sacrifices in a way that they should not have, or they're offering tainted sacrifices or something. The wording in Leviticus chapter 10 is not specific, because it just says strange fire. They offered a strange offering. So essentially not according to God's word, somehow. So Nadab and Abihu did this, and instead of the sacrifice being burned, they were burned by God's fire. So they died. And then Aaron's 3rd and 4th children, they were now in the line of the high priest. So Aaron's successor was actually his 3rd son, who had the rights of the firstborn. So bottom line, don't go against God's word. That's what this means. Don't go against God's word. Son-in-law. So, and he definitely did not have, so no rights of the firstborn of this family, because this would have gone to one of the 3 people in between him and Annas. Because Annas was deposed by the Romans 15 AD, then you had 3 different high priests who were also of this family, and then we get Caiaphas. So he definitely did not have the rights of the firstborn. And he definitely would not have this as the son-in-law, because as soon as you become the son-in-law to a family, or as soon as you marry a daughter, that daughter is reckoned to your family, not theirs. And that's how they maintain the family right system, is always going to the male. Makes it a lot easier. So say with Mary, mother of Jesus. What tribe did she belong to? We don't know. Now she was a descendant of David, so she could have been from the tribe of Judah. However, based on where she was living and her relationship to the high priest, so John the Baptist was actually himself a child of the priestly tribe, so John the Baptist was a Levite. Mary could actually have been from the tribe of Judah or from the tribe of Levi. If she was from the tribe of Levi, she would be marrying into the tribe of Judah, therefore all her children would be reckoned as Judahites. So Jesus, even if Mary was from the tribe of Levi, Jesus would be reckoned to the tribe of Judah. Yay, Levitical law! Okay. So this is also priest for life. I was trying to find any exception to this anywhere, but we don't have anything mentioned. Like, if you could just retire from the high priesthood, I have no evidence for this anywhere. It's always, we always just go back to Aaron's sons inherited the priesthood when Aaron died. That's about all we have for this right of succession. And whenever you see the line of the priesthood, it's always this son was the son of so and so, this son is the son of so and so. So we have absolutely no reason to believe that this is not priest for life. And then former high priests still living. None of them were executed or anything, they were deposed. Annas is still living. Annas is going to appear in chapter 18. Yeah. So my guess of what John is trying to do by saying high priest that year is not just saying, oh, sorry, appointed by God and family, and heredity, appointed by Romans. Okay, so I think what John's hinting at is that even though he's recognized as the high priest and he's operating as the high priest, and John's not necessarily saying that Caiaphas is not actually performing sacrifices, because if John is trying to say that Caiaphas cannot be the high priest, then all the sacrifices at the Day of Atonement are null and void, which are mandated by the law year after year, as well as any other sacrifice at the temple. At which case, if those are all illegitimate, then the entire Israelite nation has been against the word of God for however many years until the time of Jesus, from when Caiaphas took over. At which point Jesus himself would also be in violation of the law. So I don't think John is saying that Caiaphas can't act in the role of the high priest, but he's not exactly the true high priest, or should be the true high priest. So now we're going kind of the middle route. So we have Annas. So he says the tribe of Levi, otherwise he wouldn't be the high priest in the first place. And family of Aaron, because otherwise he wouldn't be the high priest in the first place before the Romans came in and tried to kick him out. This would also mean that he would have the rights of the firstborn. Then we have priest for life question mark. Because would that then mean that Caiaphas and Annas are both the high priests at the same time? I don't know. And this is why I think John will actually bring him up at the trials of Jesus later on. Because, and this is kind of the anomaly between John and the other three gospels. Because in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who is the one, the representative of the people, who is presiding the trial for Jesus? In Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Caiaphas. And this is kind of an unfair question, but is Annas even mentioned in Matthew, Mark, and Luke?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he isn't. John is the only one who mentions Annas. And this actually could be because John is trying to emphasize this priestly element. Because when we start getting to chapter 18, John says that the disciple who Jesus loved, who was friends of the high priest, came in there. So John has a little bit, as friend of the high priest, has more understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. So he actually knows more about Annas, more about Caiaphas. So when we get to the trials in John's account, he doesn't even really go over this, the Jesus trial with Caiaphas. He doesn't tackle that. He's concerned about this with Annas. So John mentions the Jesus trial with Caiaphas happens, but he's concerned with this. And that could be because John actually wants to see, or wants Jesus to be officially condemned by people under their true leader, not just this guy, who, even though he's performing the function, shouldn't be the actual high priest. He was the high priest that year, but most likely he should have been. Yeah. I'm probably going to revisit this when we eventually get to 18 and we forget all about this. 2 years from now or something, I don't know.
Have we talked about Annas? I don't remember.
No, he doesn't actually come up until chapter 18.
Oh, yeah, I don't remember ever hearing about.
No. So unless you're paying attention to this, it doesn't come up. But when Annas does come up in chapter 18, there's, I believe, 2 times explicitly that John calls him the high priest. As I mentioned, Caiaphas, who is high priest that year within that chapter, but he's also saying, and Annas the high priest, or the high priest said this to Jesus. So it seems like John is still thinking that Annas is the high priest, or at least should be considered the high priest. So if there's any question between, was Jesus actually condemned by the people and rejected by his people, John is answering that question. But John is also kind of giving Caiaphas the benefit of the doubt by also saying, yeah, he's also prophesying as the high priest. Jesus is going to die. Okay. So, questions, comments, confusions before? No, okay. Oh, wait, got something in the chat box. If the chat box would open. Okay. If Annas had no son, he did have sons. So those I have to get to Weinberg because he actually mentions this. So let's see, Annas. So Annas himself was appointed by Quirinius, the Syrian legatee. So Quirinius, what is not the Quirinius who was governor over Syria when Jesus was born, because this Quirinius was, I think, afterwards, if I remember correctly, because there's a couple different Quiriniuses. But Annas was appointed by Quirinius and then deposed by a different Roman figure. And let's see, we have Ishmael, and we don't have his house. We have Eleazar, Bar her Annas. So that would be Annas's son. He was the second one. He was deposed after a year, as well as Ishmael. And then we have Simon, who was from another house. He was deposed, and then you get Joseph bar Caiaphas, who is the son-in-law of Annas, and then he gets in, and then he's there for a while. So Annas's son already was in the priesthood, the high priesthood, and he was deposed by the Romans and replaced.
So he was a high priest from 6 AD to 15 AD.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then if my interpretation of John is correct, John is also kind of hinting, yeah, not just at 15 AD, he's still going.
So then Caiaphas would have preceded him, or followed him.
Yeah. So there's Annas. If I can put this up for everybody, some people see at least. So there's Annas, and then there's somebody who follows him, not of his house. Then he has a son who follows him. Then he has somebody not of his house again, and then you get to Caiaphas, who's of his house but a son-in-law, not a son.
So were all of those appointed by the Romans?
Pretty much.
So that would be why they're not of the family of Aaron?
We don't have any reason to say that they're not. Or at least I don't have any reason to say that they're not, because I need to do a lot of research to see if they actually would be.
But they're not,
But they're not appointed by the normal means, by heredity.
but when you say they're not of his, that's not of Annas's family, when you say not of his house?
Yeah. Not of his household, I should.
So that was abnormal, it should have gone through.
Yeah. It should have been given to whoever had the rights of the firstborn upon their death, because that would be part of the specialized inheritance to the household of Aaron. Because with the tribe of Levi, tribe of Israel, when you give an inheritance, the inheritance would be the house, which would primarily be expressed in terms of land, not an actual building or just the family, but the land. But so we'd say you would receive the house in terms of household. So you are the leader of the house, the household, as well as all the property thereof, primarily the property thereof. With the tribe of Levi, they did not own land. Now, of course, they had their own little places where they live, because there's some Levitical cities and stuff. But they were not given land like the other tribes. The other tribes had certain areas allotted to them, and the Levites were spread everywhere. So the Levites, their inheritance was whatever they received at the temple. So the meat that they're actually consuming from the sacrifices, that's how they live. They are completely dependent on proper fellowship with God of the entire nation. Because if the people stop giving sacrifices, the Levites stop. So with the specific household of Aaron within the tribe of Levi, part of the inheritance that they would receive, and inheritance is always given upon death, they would be receiving the high priesthood. So the firstborn son who gets the double share would be receiving this priesthood. And if they don't have a son by the time that they perish, then it would go to the next brother. And if that whole household dies out, then you have to kind of go back in the line and then figure out who would be the legitimate heir. That actually does happen with the household of Eli, because Eli from 1 Samuel, he was not a good high priest, and his sons died because God just decided they had to die, because they were also terrible. And yeah, when Eli heard that his sons died, then he died, and then he had to go to a different house. Or still the house of Aaron, but a different branch of the house of Aaron. Yeah, we don't do a lot of this hereditary lineage thing in Western culture quite today. And the most recent example of it that we had was very, very simple. When we saw a succession of the House of Windsor in England very recently with Queen Elizabeth II to Charles III. Because that was mother son. That was the easy one. If Elizabeth's house was vacant, like she didn't have any children, then you'd have to go back and try to figure out who would be the legitimate heir through another branch, which is basically how Elizabeth's grandfather was it? Can't remember now. But to get to the House of Windsor, a few generations back, the ruling House of England, when you had the person on the throne die, you had to go back a number of ways to try and get to the next legitimate branch, and then those people were actually, I think, if I remember correctly, no, not Schleswig-Holstein.
Elizabeth's grandfather was George V.
Might have been great grandfather, but they basically had to go to northern Germany to find the legitimate heir. Saxe-Coburg. They had to go to Germany to get the legitimate heir to put them as the head over the Kingdom of England, because that was the next one over.
So all these high priests were, in essence, they were illegitimate, and yet they were accepted by the people, or?
Sort of. This is kind of the wishy-washy nature of the religion at this time, because they should be practicing something very clear-cut and in line with their forefathers. However, basically ever since the Maccabean Wars, where the Pharisees started coming into vogue, so the Pharisees themselves were of the tribe of Levi. So you have, what was his name? I can't remember his first name. Well, the father Maccabeus and his 4 sons, who were Maccabeuses, they were Levi, and they were trying to bring the people back to proper worship of God during the Maccabean revolt. And they were basically the ones who established the Pharisaical priesthood by saying everybody should be of the same level of cleanliness and personal responsibility as Levites. So once you start getting everybody to practice like a Levite, the Levites themselves lose some kind of prominence, and you also have such a vast network of families within the tribe of Levi, because everybody's related to everybody else through a whole bunch of generations, and et cetera, et cetera. The people who can serve as high priests are now entering more into, or serve as priests, not high priests, but priests, are entering into a timetable by the time of Jesus. So you might notice, if we're talking about some priests in parables or anything else, in the straightforward historical narrative, there would be comments like, when it was so-and-so's time to go to Jerusalem, they went to Jerusalem and they served for such and such a number of months, or which was the case for John the Baptist's father, Zacharias, because when it was his appointed time, he came down to Jerusalem to offer up incense at the altar in the holy place at the temple, and then that's when Gabriel appeared to him, was within this specific time. So this is how people kind of figured the Annunciation to Mary, because the Annunciation to Mary was happening when John the Baptist was 6 months in the womb, and they go, oh, okay, when so-and-so would have come in to offer the incense it would have been this time of year, and then that's how you get to Christmas being the birth of Christ, December 25th being the birth of Christ, because you're now going 9 months from the Annunciation of Mary, which is 6 months from the servitude of Zechariah in the temple, and there you go. But the Levites take turns being in there, and yeah, the high priesthood should be more solidified, but with the different governments kind of coming in and dictating what you can do, what you cannot do, because people really couldn't defeat Herod at this time. Yeah, Herod the Great, that's his epitaph. So Herod the First, or Herod the Great, he was not a nice guy. He was extremely cutthroat, very literally cutthroat, where he would kill a whole bunch of his own family if he needed to, kill a whole bunch of his enemies. And the Jews couldn't get rid of him, so then he really shaped the face of how the country would act politically and religiously when he started appointing his own high priests, who were, again, the religious political figures within the community. So Herod knew this, knew that they were essential, would still have them, but he wanted them to be under his control. Same disagreement that the Sanhedrin is having here. Oh, like, we don't want the Romans to take away what they are allowing us to have. It's like, no, you idiots, you have this by divine right. This is yours because God appointed you for this task. Do it. Yeah. We've got 2 people closing the Bible.
It's time. Otherwise, I'm gonna be getting up again.
Okay. So let's end it here today with the discussion of the high priest. We'll go into the legitimacy of his prophecy as well as Jesus' reaction next week. Let us pray. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you for giving us our great high priest, Jesus Christ, that he was able to offer up a more perfect sacrifice of his flesh and blood upon the cross for our forgiveness of sins and our salvation. We ask you, O Lord, to always point us back to the singular sacrifice of Jesus, that we may eternally receive the blessings that are offered through it. In the name of our Lord Jesus, we pray. Amen.
I have a funeral to go to this afternoon.